Hello and welcome to another student takeover episode of the Sociology Show podcast. This episode has come in from Shenzhen College of International Education in China and has been sent in by Cecilia and Miles. Or is that really their names? All will be revealed in a little moment. First of all, before we get onto that, just to let you know that the Sociology Show podcast now offers online tutoring. Whether you want a single session, weekly sessions, multiple sessions, whatever it might be, you can book a 1 hour and a half, or 2 hour session. All you need to do is visit calendly.com/sociology show tutoring. That's Calendly, Calendly. And there you'll be able to see which slots are available. If you are also interested in contributing to the Sociology Show podcast, perhaps you've got something you'd really like to discuss, then all you need to do is record an MP3 file. You can do it on your iPhone if you like, and send over the file to the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com. I'll take a listen, and if I like it, if it's really good, then a bit like this episode, then I can put it out as an episode for you. So I mentioned this episode then. So the full title of this one is The Use of English Names Amongst Chinese International School Students. And this was sent in by Cecilia and Miles, not their real names. They will reveal all in this episode in a moment. And they are from Shenzhen College of International Education in China. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, we are students studying A-level sociology from Shenzhen College of International Education. My name is Cecilia, and my Chinese name is Junzhe.
Hi everyone, I'm Miles Li. Oh, my Chinese name is Li Haoran. It actually sounds quite weird why we introduce ourselves with both Chinese names and English names.
Yes, indeed, Miles. Have you ever thought about that? How interesting it is that we always call each other in English names. For example, I call you Miles and you call me Cecilia, despite that we both are Chinese.
Yeah, that's true. And I've noticed that not only we, most of the students here, like in this international school, call each other English names. So I remember before we entered this international college, the school asked us to put down our English name in our profile rather than our Chinese name. So probably because the place or the institution that we live in requires us to do so. So therefore, not only our classmates, the teachers and sometimes our parents call us an English name.
Yes, that's the case. I think to avoid mispronunciation by foreign teachers is the main purpose of the school, right? I guess.
Yeah, that sounds quite interesting. But when I take a step back, sometimes I find it actually quite weird seeing a group of Chinese students and some Chinese teachers calling each other's English name, don't you?
I always feel the same. Actually, I've even conducted a research on this topic. So early in the year, I did a survey among international students in my WeChat groups and moments.
Oh, really? What's the survey about?
Based on pre-observation, I used two skills to explore students' experiences in such a scenario within Chinese International High School, specifically focusing on the aspect of cultural identity by examining the correlation between English name usage and the degree of Chinese cultural identification.
Oh, that sounds fun. What's the result?
Well, I will start with the results of two separate skills. There are both 5-point Likert skills, uses 5 answer points, including a main point or neutral point, to assess a respondent's opinions. Participants rate the degree of how much the statement fits their condition. 1 is completely disagree, and 5 is strongly agree. One skill is a English name usage questionnaire with mainly 2 dimensions. One is daily usage, and the other is in-depth recognition. Daily usage includes some questions like, how often do you use your Chinese name? You always use your English name when talking to your friends, and you introduce yourself with an English name. The dimension of in-depth recognition include questions like, do you prefer your English name rather than your Chinese name? Do you think there's like a strong attachment to your English name? I found that the dimension of daily usage has a higher score than in-depth recognition. This demonstrates the instrumental properties of the names rather than a source of identity, I think.
Oh, so like, what do you think? What do you mean by instrumental properties of the name?
I think it means that using an English name is more of a daily practice.
Oh,
Yes. And another skill, cultural identity skill, I think there's no significant difference between the two dimensions. One is emotional commitment and behavioral exploration. I mean, there's no specific difference of the scores, the results of these two dimensions. So overall, this particular statistic shows a commonly identified Chinese cultural identity, both in a way that people are attached to Chinese culture and that people are willing to further explore and advocate for the culture.
oh, I see. And I've noticed that the focus of the research is about the correlation between the cultural identity, Chinese cultural identification, and English name usage. And actually, I wonder, what about the correlation examination? What's the result about that?
The result was quite surprising, I think. I found that there is a positive correlation between the daily usage of English names and the overall Chinese cultural identity, especially participants' willingness to further explore their cultural identity.
Oh, that is quite counterintuitive, I think, because like naturally we might think that if a person has great attachment to Chinese identity, he may be more likely to use his or her Chinese name rather than his English names. But the result seems to be like the opposite. So what do you think is the rationale behind it?
I think this is a very interesting question. So I first delve more into the correlations between specific questions from the skills. Maybe we can find some potential explanation. For instance, there's two questions I want to mention. One is that I don't resent my English name being used in any situation. And the other statement is, I think my English name helps me to integrate into the school environment better. I found a significant positive correlation between these two questions and the cultural identity skills result, the total score of it. This might indicate a greater cultural inclusiveness and adaptability of the students to navigate an intersection of both English and Chinese, maybe cultural or language usage.
Oh, so your emphasis on inclusiveness and adaptability sounds very inspiring. And I guess the reason behind this positive relationship between like greater English name usage and strong cultural identity to like Chinese identity may be because like the more students aligns with Chinese identity, the more he actually realizes the gap or the difference between Chinese and Western culture. So in this international environment, he or she might want to use an English name more often in this English environment to better integrate into the English world. So he actually realized this separation between like the Chinese world and like the Western or English world. So keep using a Chinese name, which is actually a strong representation of Chinese identity, may be a barrier to solve their identity conflicts in such an international environment. So I think inherently, there may be a sense or need of inclusiveness and adaptability for them to better integrate into the environment.
Miles, I think your explanation is excellent. Like, to be honest, are you talking about yourself in this sense that like this is your idea or thought?
Yeah, to some extent. So my own understanding is like based on what I've talked about before.
I see. I've also found another interesting result. Like there is also a negative correlation between the likeness and identification of the participant's English name and the degree of emotional commitment to Chinese culture. I think this can be explained in a similar way as you said, that students may perceive English names as more consistent with an internationalized identity, whereas Chinese names may be seen as a symbol of tradition or confinement to a particular culture. Influenced by globalization and international education, they might be more likely to adopt foreign cultural elements and weaken their identification with Chinese culture, developing this sort of hybrid identity, I think.
Oh, that sounds a very reasonable conclusion. And have you met any particular challenge when researching the topic?
Well, my main concern when researching this topic is that the self-report questionnaire may cause some bias. For example, participants may misunderstand the statement given by the questionnaire or influenced by the Hawthorne effect we learned in the unit of research method. So Hawthorne effects means that participants may modify an aspect of their answers in response to their awareness of being observed or being analyzed by a researcher, which is me in this case. I think this is the major limitation of questionnaire that is difficult to avoid. However, I still consider questionnaire a quite reliable research method.
Yeah, that makes sense. So because the survey is conducted in China, so people may be subject to the pressure or expectation that they need to be like somehow patriotic. Mm-hmm. So like they may assume that the researcher is somehow patriotic. So this might change or like distort their response and probably result in an overestimation of the attachment to Chinese identity. And also what I'm curious about actually is that the concept of identity may be constantly changing, especially for students in adolescence, because like students are still growing and their mentality is pretty unstable and constantly changing. And I think this may be like strongly affect the result. Like probably, I mean, like doing a longitudinal study for like a long time can track their changes or somehow like make the research more valid. Like, do you think so?
Yes, I think you're definitely right. You remind me of another concern, that the fact is that identity is fluid and has several aspects. For example, some people may resonate a lot with the food in China or particular manner or like Chinese literature, but they don't necessarily identify with other aspects of Chinese culture. So maybe this makes it quite hard to discuss the whole topic in one single study. The method of questionnaire lacks validity in this case. Therefore, to track the changes and for a more valid approach, I think what you've suggested, a longitudinal study and maybe a follow-up interview with classmates, will be really helpful.
Oh, that sounds nice. So have you ever thought of some further questions that you may ask in future interviews and future studies?
Well, I am thinking of like more of a casual conversation. For example, I can start with sharing some stories about my name.
Oh, really?
Yes. Actually, to tell you a secret, my first English name is not Cecilia. That sounds quite normal. Well, at least like comparing to my first name. My first name is Apple because I have this Chinese nickname of 果果, which means apple fruit in Chinese. I kept the name till the age of 12. Then, for the purpose of going into an international summer camp, I think, no, this is the time that I should change to a serious name.
Yeah.
I'll stop using a name like so funny as Apple.
Yeah, you'll be laughed at or you'll be mocked by other students or teachers.
Yes, exactly. So I chose the name Cecilia from the literature for children, and the Cecilia is with an E instead of an I because I think it makes me a little bit more special.
Oh.
Yes. What about your name, Miles?
Yeah. So I actually noticed that you're like seeking a sense of like uniqueness and a sense of the meaning or the purpose of this name. And that's true also for me because so I actually picked Miles. I picked this name like 3 years ago when I first like came into this international school. So basically the reason why I chose this name is because like I Googled it and I found out the meaning of it is like it means like quite wise and pretty introverted and like somehow introspective, like which is I think it's a best fit of my personality.
Yeah.
So I just chose this name.
I think it's really funny that in most cases our names are given by parents, like our Chinese name and most of English names for Westerners, or names in their own culture. But in this case, we can freely access our sort of agency or our decision to make a choice for ourselves, to have a name that is like truly decided on our own mind or something.
Yeah. So I think there's a fundamental difference between the origin of like English names of students or people from a different cultural background because they can use their agency to like freely choose their name. And also, so you mentioned that you have changed your names once, so it actually reflects the fluidity of our identity because like we can constantly change our name.
Yes.
As long as we like don't like it.
Yeah, but it's really hard to change a Chinese name, right?
Oh yeah.
Not like legally, but like from the bottom of our heart, how we resonate with the name. For example, whenever people calls me in my Chinese name, I just respond naturally. But sometimes if people call me in my English name, I may like hesitate for a moment.
Yeah, because like there are some like past experience, people you meet, the books you read, and like your sadness and your happiness like inherently embedded within your name. So when people call your Chinese name or like your original name, then like you might intuitively like turn around and then they'd be like, oh, why are you calling me?
Yes. So I think like in this case, maybe you don't relate to your English name that much, or do you prefer your Chinese name or your English name? And do they like mean so different to you? What do you think?
So, I mean, personally, I think there are different meanings within these two names. So I think in a Chinese environment, I might like be more likely to use my Chinese name because it's like closely related to my past experience with my parents, my friends, and these are all within the Chinese environment. But for the English name, then there are a lot of memories and different kinds of stuff that is related to these English names. So I see a clear separation between the usage of these two names. So what about you?
Well, I think it's true that names are carrying something like really in-depth.
Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
For me, I think like my experience or my attitude towards the usage of names is similar to you, because I don't like any of my friends like who knows me when we are in a Chinese context to use my English name. That sounds weird. That sounds they are like teasing me. But in this school where I met everybody, like we all use our English name.
Yeah.
In this case, it's quite natural, and I think there's a sense of community based on the English name usage. Like, for example, in daily conversations, we always call each other English names, and we are frequently switching between Chinese and English. This kind of communication is unique and special compared to like other personal relations.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you.
See, so I think it's time to switch the topic a little bit to the Chinese identity part. What do you think? Like, how would you rate your Chinese identity? And probably, like we mentioned, some aspects of Chinese identity. How will you explain this sort of relation or attachment to identity regarding various aspects?
So I personally feel like an identity is like a very complex topic because it involves so many parts.
Yeah.
So it actually includes your personal attachment to, let's say, like a culture, including like food, language, and like personal relationship. So I mean, because we are actually born and grow up in the Chinese context. So basically, you can't deny that you have a close relationship with your like, let's say, your family and your friends in this Chinese context. So I mean, for me personally, I would say I have a strong attachment to Chinese culture.
I see. I think, well, it was obviously understandable, especially like we both come from, public Chinese schools. Like before we entered this international school, we always receive education in our Chinese context. And I was wondering about, how do you feel like when you first transferred to these international schools? Do English name help you maybe integrate a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. Because like when you're entering a completely new environment, and then you want to like get away from the past, then you need a brand new name. Then probably an English name is like a new start, and kind of like refresh your mind and like open up a new page for you. So yeah, basically that's actually related to what you mentioned above. It's the concept of agency, right? So you can use your free agency to probably open up a completely new space for you to explore by adopting the English name.
I see. You're talking about something I just mentioned, like practical use,
yeah,
right? But
practical, but also
yes.
but also related to identity
and culture, right?
Yeah.
So I've actually come across this concept of cultural assimilation while doing some literature review.
Yeah.
Like it means that you're integrating not only like the school environment but also a cultural
context.
Yes, like the whole context within English. Do you think the name is like a representation of you, like delve more into the environment? For example, like let me give you an example. Some foreigners who travel around China, who's really interested with the sort of East Asian culture, they chose a Chinese name for themselves and they use it in the Chinese context. Do you think it's something similar, or is it a totally different thing when it comes to like we adopting English names?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that some foreigners, like so-called foreigners from our perspectives, they come to China and then they adopt a Chinese name, which is quite funny So actually the meaning or like the connotations of the words or the letter is quite funny.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that. So like,
I think it works like the other way around.
Yeah.
Sometimes we choose really strange English names that
English
make native speakers laugh a lot.
Yeah.
Yes. For example, Apple in
Yeah.
the first place. Yeah.
or some very like prestigious or like very upper class names.
Yes, or maybe some religious names,
Yeah.
or names from Spain or other culture, like a Chinese name using a Spanish name. That's just
This sounds weird
yes,
because you don't actually have the connection within the culture.
yes, indeed. So, do you plan to keep your English name after entering the university? What's your plan for the future? You mentioned maybe there's like a cultural barrier or sort of cultural appropriation, when we are trying to use a name in different culture.
Yeah, that's a good question because like we don't actually know what will happen after we enter the university. So basically when we are in like completely English environment, we might want to use our English name or like Chinese name. So basically it depends.
Yes, like I think for me the greatest challenge is still pronunciation.
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's quite hard for professors to like recognize the name and just react with a correct pronunciation.
Yeah, but they can just call you your surname.
Yes, that's right. I think in this Paris Olympics, people are recording the names, like the right pronunciation of the
Yeah.
names, and put on the audios into the internet, and just so that there's no confusion. Do you
Yeah.
think that may be a good like solution to the problem?
That's also pretty hard though, because
Yeah.
when you yourself pronounce the name, it's quite hard. Like
Yes.
like the foreigners, like let's say, those commentators in Olympics, they know how Wang Zhuqin is pronounced, but they just can't pronounce
yes,
that name very
yes.
accurately.
Yeah. Yes, that may happen sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, overall, it's still a quite, I would say, complex topic to say.
Yeah.
I think in some college pages, I see they are doing this audio things.
Oh.
So, to show some respects for other cultures to adapt this sort of globalized environment. I think it's sometimes schools and us, we are both working towards it.
Yeah. And I think it's a good thing to attach equal importance to like different writings and different pronunciations
Yeah.
of names.
Yes. Like, for example, when I have to do some signatures online, I have to type the pinyin of my names instead
Yeah.
of the real characters. I think it's a really great conversation for us. Do you have anything else to share?
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here and then have this podcast. Yeah.
So, it's been an inspiring conversation between us, I think. So I hope you guys find this episode useful. And thank you so much for listening. Goodbye. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email thesociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.